to Security Analysis. I am Uday Bhaskar. The focus this week, predictably, is on 20 years after 9/11. The actual day occurs on Saturday this year, Saturday, September 11, 2021, which marks 2 decades after the enormity of what happened in 2001 when the World Trade Center came down. Today, we will look at the events in a more reflective way. The most recent image is that of the United States and the withdrawal from Kabul. And in the last 3 weeks, we have had some major political developments within Afghanistan, which is that the Taliban have seized power. I think it's important to underline the fact that they have seized power, and an interim government has been formed. And there is a very tragic irony here that the United States embarked on this war, the global war on terror, to oust the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda. And today we have the Taliban back in power in Kabul. And it appears that they have also provided an umbrella to groups like the Al-Qaeda. We're not quite sure about the footprint of the Islamic State, particularly what is now being referred to as the IS Khorasan. Now, all of this has led to different kinds of convulsions. Primarily, these events have impacted the lives of the Afghan citizens, particularly those who do not subscribe to the ideology of the Taliban. And at different levels and layers, we can see a regional impact in relation to Pakistan, Iran, and proximate countries, including India. We see a major global impact, which is in terms of the credibility of the United States and larger global geopolitics. And of course, embedded in all of this is the fervor of Islamic jihad. There is this constant refrain that it was this fervor that defeated the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And now it has, in a way, brought the United States to its knees. So what does all of this mean? Do we see the return of, or the triumphalism of this jihadi fervor? To examine all these issues, place them in the appropriate context, I have great pleasure, and it's a privilege to introduce and welcome Ambassador Shyam Saran. He's a former Foreign Secretary, former Special Envoy to the Prime Minister of India. And currently, of course, he has a rather modest hat. He says that he's a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research. Shyam sir, very glad to have you on board. Welcome.
Thank you.
Let me get into the discussion straight away. Given your own, I would say, perch as a serving diplomat during those decades in the 90s, you were the Foreign Secretary subsequently. 20 years later, how would you assess these events? As I said, we are trying to look at this in a more reflective way and not talk about breaking news. So perhaps you might want to look at Afghanistan itself. I mean, I characterized it as a tragic irony that you enter or embark on this war ostensibly to remove the Taliban, and now you're negotiating with them. And the UNSC is even talking about giving them some kind of legitimacy. Over to you, Shyam sir.
Thank you very much, Uday. Always a pleasure to be on your platform. With regard to what's happening in Afghanistan, of course, as you mentioned, this is something like, the concluding chapter of what began in 2001. So in a very real sense, we have, the circle has come back to where we may have started. So I want to make just a few observations. One is that with the constitution of this caretaker government in Kabul, the debate whether we have a 2.0 Taliban or whether it is still 1.0 Taliban, I think that debate is settled. It is Taliban 1.0 in a slightly sort of burnished 2.0 cloak, as it were. So I think any kind of a hope and a prayer that this is going to be a very different kind of dispensation I think that ghost has been laid to rest. And that has major implications, as you would accept. The second point that I would like to make is that any kind of projection that this was a nationalist group, that this was a group which had a very strong sense of independence, it would not really dance to anybody else's tune. I think that ghost has also been laid to rest. Maybe you have seen some of the comments that I have made in writing, but also in some shows of this kind. I have said that the Pakistani role is fundamental in ensuring the victory of the Taliban, and they will be cashing on their chips. And you have seen that, in fact, with the prominence given to the Haqqani group. And I had mentioned earlier in some of my comments that what we should be watching out is what is the role that the Haqqani group will have. And in a sense, my worst fears have come true, because the most important and most powerful element in this caretaker government and going forward is going to be the Haqqani group. And the Pakistanis have actually, in a sense, been very happy to project their role in bringing this about. I mean, the very prominent visit taking place of the Pakistani ISI chief. Intelligence chiefs normally do not want to have too much publicity about what they are doing. But here was an ISI chief who was more than happy, to appear on the television screens and look very smug. And the projection Pakistan is giving is, you want to do business with this dispensation, you have to deal with us. That's the message that is going on. That if you want to be safe, if you want to be secure, if you want to have engagement with this group, we are going to be the channel through which you can do that. So the end point that I'm making is that all the different kinds of very hopeful sort of expectations, some anticipation that things are not really going to be so bad, I think that has been now put aside, or at least should be put aside. If you do not put those aside, you cannot make the right kind of responses.
I think that's absolutely right.
For India, but also true for the international community.
No, I think that's a very lucid and succinct way of summing up, because in many ways I would extrapolate and take this forward, what you have just said, to say that many veils are being lifted. And I think the most important is what you have characterized as, this is actually Taliban 1.0. If anything, we can describe this as Taliban 1.0 with cell phones. That they did not have the cell phone.
Yes.
When we look at the period 96 to 2001.
Quite right.
But since you have made reference to Pakistan, which was really the area that I wanted to move to, again, these are, I think, well-known bullets, that Pakistan midwifed the birth of the Taliban. That is now accepted as one of the tenets of the regional geopolitics. And the second is the centrality of the Haqqani group, which again, we have seen over the last 20 years when Pakistan was nurturing different factions of the Taliban. Now, the related, I thought, interesting development is the manner in which China has been very supportive of Pakistan's orientation towards Afghanistan, Taliban. And I think they are among the first major countries to say that they will recognize the Taliban and that they would also provide immediate aid of about $30 to $31 million. Now, again, coming back to regional geopolitics, and we'll bring Russia in a little later. But if you look at what I often say is Haqqani today is the front or the most visible face of the Taliban as far as the region is concerned. The Pakistani ISI, and as you said, the intelligence chief being there, is perhaps the equivalent of the postmodern spy chief who actually wants the cameras. Whereas earlier they stayed away from the cameras. This is a new development. But the ISI, the deep state, as being supportive of the Taliban. China, in turn, providing political diplomatic support to Pakistan. What does all of this mean when we are talking about the US having lost its credibility and the US image being dented as far as Southern Asia is concerned? Shyam sir?
Well, there is no doubt that American credibility has taken a huge knock. There is no way of getting away from that. Whether this is going to be something transient or will have more permanent impacts, that remains to be seen. That will very much depend upon, many other factors. Like, for example, is the United States of America going to once again get back to a path of, higher economic growth, recover its, creative kind of, innovative spirit? Will it be able to get over this, in a sense, a psychological defensive-ness about itself and about democracy as well? Some are tangible factors, some are intangible factors. But in the immediate future, that is going forward the next several months and maybe some years, there is no doubt that the United States of America, its ability to play a critical role in global affairs, in regional affairs, that is going to be at a discount. I don't think we can get away from that. Now, the issue that you raised about, China, I think China at this particular point of time is banking on, number one, the fact that Pakistan has, in a sense, if not a stranglehold, it has a very, very prominent sort of influence over the new dispensation in Kabul. Therefore, perhaps as an iron brother, Pakistan will keep Chinese interests, in mind. Secondly, I think there is also a sense that even though there are worries about a fundamentalist government taking office in Kabul, maybe China can take care of some of its interests in Xinjiang by having a positive kind of and a constructive kind of approach to this new dispensation. But let me say, these are hopes. These are not realities at this point of time. I see that there is continuing to be a nervousness in China about what this new development in Afghanistan may mean for them. Do we move in and not be too cautious about what we have to do, or should we do the minimal that is required in order to keep things under control, but wait and see? Certainly, if you look at the attitude of and the recent moves by Russia, we see a shift. There is no doubt about that. That is, Russia is willing to be a little more cautious, a little more careful in accepting, this particular new dispensation. Even today, China is continuing to say there should be an inclusive, inclusive government. That has not been delivered on. Now, the important thing to remember, Uday, is at this point of time that you now have the ball being thrown back into the court of the international community. That is, they have said, say what you may, whatever advice you are giving, we will do what we want to do. Whether it is in terms of, the nature of the political dispensation, the policies we follow, you have no control over that. Okay. So the question now is, if this is what has been clearly projected by the Taliban, what are you going to do as the international community? Because the first issue that will come up is, here are people in very critical positions who are on the UN sanction list, not even on bilateral sanction list. What are you going to do? Are you going to, in fact, accept that, well, this is a government in place, we have to take them off the sanction list? We have to stop referring to them as terrorists. Now, so this is why I said the ball is now being thrown right back at the international community.
No, absolutely. I think
we will not change. Yeah. We will not change. You have to change, and you have to accept. So it will be very interesting to see, how this actually plays out.
I thought there were 2 or 3 aspects here. Ever since Doha, for instance, which was on the watch of then US President Donald Trump, the Taliban has exuded a certain confidence that we are not going to give in on any of the substantive issues. And they have, in a way, enticed the global community. At that time, Qatar was the Sherpa and the United States and so on. But no, since you have used the word ball, saying that they have thrown the ball back, I am saying actually it's like a gauntlet that the Taliban has now literally flung in the face of the global community. And who will pick it up? And why I'm emphasizing this as a challenge is because even for China, there is deep concern about what this jihadi fervor can do, the triumphalism that I spoke about. And I'm just reminded of a conversation that we had more than 2 decades ago. Perhaps you may also recollect this. The visit of Mr. Primakov after the disintegration of the former Soviet Union. I was then in the IDSA as a young researcher, and he had not yet become prime minister. And I remember repeatedly when we had hosted him at the IIC, he said, refer to me as professor. I'm Professor Primakov. And in one of those closed door sessions, he actually raised a very interesting observation, saying that, yes, the Soviet Union has been forced to withdraw from Afghanistan at that time. It also implied the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. But he was raising this as a thought, as a query, saying that the United States, which has such depth in terms of its think tanks and understanding geopolitics and so on and so forth, that they had nurtured the Mujahideen. The famous image of the warrior with the Quran in one hand, the Kalashnikov in the other. And
the Haqqani group was the favored group.
Absolutely. I mean, they were supported by the Americans at that time, if you remember. So Mr. Primakov's observation, I'm summarizing this, it was a long discussion, to say that, did they ever think of the fact that these same forces that they have unleashed will actually come to threaten them and bite them in a rather sensitive part of the anatomy? Now, that's exactly what has happened. And so my query to you, I think you were either in the PMO or I'm sure you were sort of looking at all these developments. Wouldn't the Chinese, with all their, the kind of astuteness that we ascribe to them, be thinking of the same exigency? That you are a neighbor of Afghanistan, at least the United States was not a neighbor. But yet 9/11 happened. The World Trade Center came down.
Let me put it this way. There is a certain logic to empire. That is, empires are not steady state entities. Empires either expand, and if they don't expand, then they start, in fact, receding. This is history. I mean, right? If you look at history of the last 3,000 years, you will find that this is the normal sort of pattern. So China is not an exception to this. Even though people may feel that this is it is an exception, it is not. So what I anticipate is that despite all the reservations that the Chinese may have about not getting sort of sucked into a Afghanistan, which in fact, like you said, is a repeat of the experience of the Americans, the Soviets and the Americans. They don't want to be third in line. Quite right. But as I am saying that, Afghanistan and Afghanistan together with Pakistan, the AFPAK, this is now China's AFPAK. So what does that mean? It means that with respect to this particular region, it is critical to China's Central Asian policy, Central Asian strategy. China today is the legatee of Soviet Central Asia. So if you are looking at Afghanistan in the broader strategic picture seen from Beijing, this is a critical component of that larger Central Asian policy. And secondly, it has special importance for China because two of its most difficult terrains, Xinjiang and Tibet. This is the rim of that particular region, which is the region which is perhaps the least stable as far as China's internal politics is concerned. So therefore, no matter how much you want to say that I don't want to get embroiled in this, if others are also not really stepping up, the Americans have withdrawn, the Russians are basically saying, okay, you go ahead, maybe we will follow behind. Okay, that is the situation today. So if you are saying at any point of time, no, this is too difficult, this is too much of a problem, I will not get sucked in, then you will have to go back.
Correct.
So that's why I said there is a logic to empire which China cannot say, I will go only this far and I will not go any further. You are now responsible for AFPAC. You may not say it in the same terms as the Americans used to, but today AFPAC is a Chinese, going to be a Chinese concern. Now, how they deal with this is remains to be seen. As I said, in this initial phase, they are in fact anticipating that they can somehow or the other, balance this with the help of Pakistan. But as you are aware, they do not also have enough confidence in Pakistan's ability to always deliver. So it's a very interesting dynamic. In a sense, it might be worthwhile to sit back and watch this game start playing.
I think what you're saying, again, I'm saying this perhaps in lighter vein and I can get away with it, which is that the Russians, which is to say that Moscow, having had its own experience, was watching on the sidelines as the United States and Washington, D.C. got more and more into this quagmire of Afghanistan. Is it possible that, when you talk about empire and logic, that there is an inevitability of logic morphing into hubris? And that this time around, you will have both Moscow and Washington on the sidelines, and perhaps Delhi will join them on this wait and watch to see how China is going to deal with the so-called new Pak-Af or Pakistan-Afghanistan as opposed to AFPAC, and whether or not they would be able to stabilize it. But these are
Uday, what has surprised me is the speed with which Russia has switched to hedging mode.
Correct.
Having started off with support for Taliban, we are the ones who are engaging with them. We have to, have a different view about this dispensation. It is not the same as it was before. They, in fact, were like almost like an apologist along with, China. Today, you see a sort of different attitude with the latest developments. Over the past, few weeks, why has Russia started doing military exercises on the borders with Afghanistan, in Tajikistan, in Uzbekistan, in Kyrgyzstan? For what reason? If you are so confident, then why are you doing this? Secondly, I attach importance to the fact that the Russian security advisor considers it important enough to land up here in Delhi to talk about, how are we going to deal with the situation. So there is hedging going on. There is rethinking going on. Maybe what we had anticipated, that is not going to happen. This is why I said that, the gauntlet, as you said, I said ball, but you said gauntlet. Gauntlet has been thrown to all major powers. This is what we are. You have to now take a call. And taking that call means the international community dispensing with, jettisoning very important norms that it had so far,
absolutely.
maybe rhetorically, but at least had, said terrorism is not acceptable.
Absolutely.
And therefore, if somebody has a terrorist label on him, to then receive him at the United States, United Nations as the Minister of Afghanistan, that's a pretty long distance to travel, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, this is going to be the ultimate irony. I'm just sharing something I saw on social media early this morning after the interim government had been announced and the Western capitals are now coming to terms with this. One of the tweets that I saw actually noted that 14 of the members in the interim government are designated on the UN terrorist list.
Yes.
So the difficult situation, the dilemma that they talk about is, what if the new government in Kabul, the interim government, sends as diplomats to major countries their own Afghan diplomats or now new diplomats who are on the terrorist list? How do you deal with it? What is going to be the protocol? So I think these are very difficult areas. But Shyam sir, as always, I often describe you as the man who knows too much. So trying to get you into a half an hour slot is a bit difficult, but this is the tyranny of time. What I will do is I want you to look at India and 9/11, and particularly Kashmir. When we often say, a lot of people ask this question, I've heard this over the last 3 weeks, why is India getting so agitated or anxious or concerned about developments in Afghanistan? It's a landlocked country, impoverished. They can't do very much to India. Let Pakistan stew in its own strategic juice kind of reduction, which, as I said, is rather binary. But we know what happened in December 1999 when Mr. Vajpayee was the prime minister, and the way in which not only India's prestige, but India's, I would say, core security interests were impacted in relation to terrorism. But today with Kashmir and what the Modi government has done in terms of the new political approach in bifurcating the state, the union territory, all of that. And one of the first statements that came out of Kabul, whether it is to the Al-Qaeda or the IS, I don't think the provenance is so important, but there was a reference to Kashmir. And I'm coming back to this question of triumphalism that was evidenced when we saw some of the early remarks after the United States withdrew. How do you see this? Kashmir, 9/11, India, all of that. Shyam sir?
So the way to sort of approach this question is to ask, why is Afghanistan important to Pakistan? Because the answer to that question is really very important. Afghanistan is important to Pakistan from the prism of its hostility to India.
Yeah.
That is, Afghanistan at the minimum must not become a base for India through a friendly government in Kabul to actually target Pakistan. That's the minimum. But the more important thing is, can we make Afghanistan, and this is Pakistan's AFPAK, can we utilize Afghanistan to, in fact, undermine the interests of the country that we regard as the greatest threat to Pakistan? Whether it is true or not, that's a different matter. That is the perception. So Afghanistan to Pakistan is important in terms of its India policy. It doesn't matter in terms of Pakistan's Central Asian policy or in Pakistan's interests with regard to the Gulf. No, that may be the case with China, but that's not the case with Pakistan. So if that is the most important objective as far as Pakistan is concerned, how can I be confident that having got what it wanted in Afghanistan and got its chief agents in the most critical positions, governmental positions, it will not want to deliver on its anti-India objective? I mean, that's if anyone in India or elsewhere thinks that okay, a change has taken place, why should we worry? Or you should be very, very worried.
Correct.
So I think having a live border now in eastern Ladakh, having a disturbed situation continuing in the valley in Jammu and Kashmir, and now having on the other side of the border an adversary who feels very empowered because of what it has managed to engineer despite all the odds against it. I mean, if you look at it from the Pakistani point of view, they have turned what has been tremendous weakness, and that weakness will probably continue. But they have delivered a triumph. out of very little, actually. And they have a China, which whatever concerns it may have about Pakistan, is too deeply invested now to say, sorry, I'm going to leave. You know, if China may come to a point where it may have to face a similar situation in Pakistan as US has faced in Afghanistan. But that is perhaps for the future. So from the Pakistani point of view, actually you are getting into a opportunity phase with regard to its objectives vis-a-vis India. Now, I think we must actually respond on that assumption. Any other assumption is going to be very costly for India.
Correct. No, absolutely. I think, this last bit about how Afghanistan becomes relevant for India is something that has to be, I think, reiterated, mainly because there seems to be, again, a perception that at the end of the day, 20 years after 9/11, it is Pakistan that has emerged as quote unquote the victor. But history tells us that more than victory, I think this is the beginning of a Faustian bargain for Pakistan that actually began perhaps even during the Cold War and immediately thereafter. But these are, I think this is a very dynamic situation. It is sort of evolving day by day.
Uday, it is a great victory for the most obscurantist and fundamentalist elements in Pakistan itself.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We should not underestimate that.
So that blowback is something perhaps we'll have to see how.
And of course, internationally.
Absolutely.
Internationally, look at the, in a sense, coincidence that you have this major trial taking place in Paris today.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Of the one of the terrorists.
He describes himself as a soldier of the IS.
That's right. He describes himself as the soldier of the IS. And then you have this happening on this side. The manner in which that particular terrorist is projecting himself is, do what you might. Absolutely. But we are on a roll. We are winning. So that kind of a psychological boost that has been given to jihadi groups and terrorist groups across the world. This is bad news, not just for India. It is bad news for everyone.
No, absolutely. And I think that is the last bit, that India also is not insulated. And I think, as you have rightly pointed out, there are many elements that would have to be kept in mind 20 years after 9/11. So, Ambassador Shyam Saran, I want to thank you, as always, for bringing a lot of lucidity and clarity into the complexities of regional and global geopolitics. But if I could just sort of look at this and step back a bit, I think the 20 years after 9/11 kind of fallout is still unspooling. But if you look at current developments, the fact that we have Russia represented by its national security advisor, and the United States, the CIA chief, Mr. Bill Burns, was also in Delhi talking about the same issues. And we have now Prime Minister Modi chairing the meeting of the BRICS. So I think the global concern about terrorism and its latest triumphalism in Afghanistan is very palpable. But there's no doubt that 20 years after 9/11, we are not only in a turbulent world, but we are also in a world where multiple fractures are waiting to happen across many tracks: geopolitics, geoeconomics, and I think the larger aspect of human security, all of this taking place against the backdrop of COVID and the pandemic. But Afghanistan will be on our radar for some time to come. Let me, on that note, again thank Ambassador Shyam Saran. Thank you for watching Security Analysis. We'll be back again next week. Jai Hind.